Chapter 115. When is it necessary to take refuge in the summer heat? If it was an ordinary adult talking to a demented child with only a few years of wisdom, it might be easy to get bored. But Fan Xian was different. Fan Xian had spent those last years of his previous life lying in bed unable to move, and when he practiced that strange overbearing gong skill in this life, he often fell into a semi-vegetative state as well, so his patience was excellent. And coupled with the fact that he felt pity for this mentally retarded great uncle in front of him, called Debeo, he could patiently smile while chatting with Debeo. In Fan Xian's mind, this big fat man beside him who was a bit slow to move was really much more lovable and trustworthy than the rest of the people in Kyoto. I say, big brother, why is Debeo so fat but you're so skinny? Debeo frowned, seemingly troubled by this question. Fan Xian responded with a bitter smile. First, you're my big brother, and I'll be your brother-in-law in the future. Second, I'm not skinny, it's just that Debeo is a bit fat. Debeo shook his head, yawned, and took a piece of Jiangnan soft cake from the table beside him and put it in his mouth, chewing vigorously and slurring his words. Debeo is not fat, he just likes to eat. Seeing that the Prime Minister has not yet passed on his own meaning, Fan Xian's eyes turned, came to his great-uncle's ear and said, Debeo, when will I take you out to play? Play? Play what? Play? Debeo said happily, I want to play polo. Huh? Fan Xian had a headache, thinking that he was really looking for things to do for himself. This thought was to bring his great-uncle to spend the summer, and by the way, as an excuse, he also dragged Warner out of the forbidding royal compound. Where did he think that this big fat uncle actually wanted to play polo, and hurriedly changed his words and said, Debeo, do you want to listen to a story? Debeo's nostrils flared and contracted twice, inhaled 2 breaths and said cheerfully, good. Debeo loves to listen to stories. So then, the garden of the Prime Minister's house began to sound a refreshing voice, which voice in the storytelling, the story said, a long and beautiful Snow White and the 7 dwarfs, in a forest happy life, one day Snow White went to pick the small mushrooms. Somewhat unexpected. Chancellor Lin Ruofu looked over there from afar through the window and said with a slight smile, do you think he's pretending? Yuan Hongdao shook his head, unlike, see Mr. Fan full of smiles extremely sincere, should be from the heart. Lin Ruofu sighed, invite him in. Fan Xian had been a little nervous since he entered the private residence of the Prime Minister's residence, and when he walked into the Prime Minister's private study, he couldn't help but see his future father-in-law's face for the first time, and he couldn't help but gently shiver with his right hand's tail finger. After all, the death of the other party's only sane son had nothing to do with him. However, his face remained respectful and calmly abnormal. Greetings to Uncle Lensher. Addressing was a very delicate matter. Calling Lord Chancellor was definitely not suitable. Calling boss man was not pretty either. Calling Shibe could both bring the Fan and Lin families closer, and also vaguely show in advance the closeness that this marriage would bring. Lin Ruofu looked at Fan Xian's calm face favor, somewhat satisfied with this kid's performance, and said after a little deliberation, today, I invited Mr. Fan to come, and I think Mr. Fan also understands what it means. Fan Xian hurriedly smiled and responded, Shibe called my nephew's name just fine. Lin Ruofu nodded, Fan Xian. Have you any opinions about this marriage? Fan Xian thought to himself, what opinion could he have? He was too happy to be happy. A blush appeared involuntarily on his face. Seeing his expression, Lin Ruofu became more at ease deep down and smiled. As you can see, after Gonger's departure, I only have this one son and one daughter. Chenner is married to you, so you must treat her well. Fan Xian bowed his head and answered yes in a deep voice, without dragging his feet. The older generation, there will always be a day when they go. Lin Ruofu suddenly said in a clear voice, if I take the liberty of saying, if there is a day in the future when I want to entrust my son to you, do you have the commitment? Fan Xian pondered briefly, stood up, bowed with both fists clasped, and said, of course. In the future, we will be considered family, so there are some things that I can say in front of you to make things clearer. Lin Ruofu looked at the teenager's eyes, as if he wanted to look into his heart, and said word by word, although I rarely meet one heir, she is after all my daughter, and since her surname is Lin, she has to think about the Lin family. Once the marriage is over, I believe Lord Sananbo also understands that you and I are in a relationship of co-prosperity. I hope that in the future, no matter if you are in the imperial court or in the wild, you have to remember your own identity. And from now on, you have to protect, no longer just the Fan family, but also the interests of the Lin family. This was indeed blunt enough, but it was the only thing that showed that Lord Chancellor had finally nodded his head genuinely to this marriage. Fan Xian's heart surged with joy, although marrying Wanner is a matter handled by the palace, but being able to get his father-in-law's approval will naturally make it more legitimate. Just think of the other meaning of these words. Fan Xian cannot help but have some headaches. The first meeting of the old man has obviously shed the East Palace, but do not know whether to prepare to lean on the side of the second prince. The world all said, Fan House and Jing Wang House are the second prince's help, but Fan Xian is clear, his father's heart can be much more complicated. I would like to say that after the successful conclusion of this trip to the palace, Lin Wanner finally had a chance to go to the palace, and was filial in front of the Empress Dowager for half a day, and somehow persuaded her uncle, who used to be an iron-faced emperor, to get a decree that she could finally leave the royal family's home and go for a stroll around the house. Lin Wanner's body in Fan Xian and the imperial doctors are careful handling, recovered extremely well, has long been able to go out for a walk, although the root of the disease has not been removed. But always hide into a small building into a unity is not a thing, so I heard that the palace has finally opened the ban. Fan Xian overjoyed, the second day of the morning with a horse-drawn carriage and should be ready to do things. Rushed to the royal family outside the courtyard to wait. I don't know how long to wait. The courtyard finally lively, first a few guards head, after a few old maids lead, there are a few pretty-looking maids to open the way. At the end, Lin Wanner and the big maids under the support of the 4 chi style from the inside came out. Lin Wanner was wearing a fresh white single skirt, wearing a lonchi bamboo hat on her head. This kind of hat is very light. The lower edge of the hat is a thin layer of veil, covering the sunlight, but also covered her beautiful face, only vaguely visible in the eyes and lips in the joy. Fan Xian greeted the front. The old maid saw the new aunt began to tense up. As heroic as the flood resistance blocked in front of the princess, several pairs of electric-like eyes looked at him viciously. Fan Xian was furious, and thought that the small master to talk about a love, but also be disturbed by you guys, really annoyed himself, and then give you some laxatives, idolized such as electricity, glaring at you bellyache into the toilet cannot come out. Lin Wanner glanced at him apologetically, but in her hand, she twisted the big maid beside her. The 4 chi ate the pain, almost screamed out, thinking who did he offend again? But she understood what the young lady meant, and hurriedly stepped forward to say to her aunt, Mr. Fan, let's go in 2 draws, and meet again at the West City Summer Resort. The Summer Resort Manor was a royal summer garden, about 20 miles west of Kyoto, and if Lin Wanner hadn't traveled today, Fan Xian wouldn't have had the qualifications to go in and enjoy himself. Fan Xian snorted coldly, but he also knew that before the wedding, if he sat in a carriage with Wanner, he was afraid that she would be ashamed and the old maids would go crazy, so he didn't say anything more, but gave Ruo at his side a wink. Ruo will understand. A slight smile, walked to the future sister-in-law's side, gently pulling Lin Wanner's hand, said a few words of what, and then along with a line of people from the other house, on the carriage in the palace. Brother, being an extra horse harnessed by the side of a team is really a very annoying thing. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xian sympathetically from the side. Fall will come soon. Fan Xian sighed. It shouldn't be a problem to have your sister follow her sister-in-law, and those damned old moms won't be able to think that lilies will bloom in the carriage as well. What is a lily? A holy plant. The 2 sides left extremely early, just at dawn, but by the time the caravan arrived at the summer palace, the sun had also awakened early, warming as much as it did its comrades, and shining on everything on the earth with unparalleled fervor. The good thing is that the royal palace has long considered these problems. The delicate royals have refused to accept the passion of the sun, so the mountain villa was built in the side of the dense forest, neighboring the mountain and looking at the lake. Shading the sun and welcoming the wind, the lake is calm, but the wind is still blowing, taking away the last trace of dryness in the forest, and returning to the people with a piece of refreshing. Fan Xian stood on the grass by the lake, looking at the scenery in front of him. The heart is so marvelous. This son of God's family farm activities are really not the same. The life treatment compared to the general courtiers is really too high on too much. That is to say, into the summer estate. I do not know if royal maid what trick, actually, said the royal guards, will be a few wives all stay in the front of the estate to drink tea to play the horse hanging to go. This lake only left a cadre of young people. Guards, or stand or sit in the far side of the guards. Maids rarely come out to play a trip, chattering a nonstop, but the lake is a 3-point reduction of the quiet, but there is no fish-eyed beads in the side of disturbing the clear. Happiness, Fan Xian. Fan Xian still felt very comfortable. After getting farther away from the crowd and gritting his teeth and making faces to drive away the eldest maid, Siki, Fan Xian was finally able to spend some time alone with Wanner. It's so hard. Fan Xian sighed. His right hand burrowed through the green grass like a snake, grabbing Wanner's soft hand like lightning, but his face was still calmly looking at the lake. It's really hard to meet a girl. Her hand was caught. Lin Wanner's face immediately reddened, shyly lowered her head, but did not draw her hand back, only spat in a low voice, at this time to call for the girl again. I don't know who shamelessly climbed the wall and turned over the window every night.